Hello, good people, or bad people, or whoever the fuck is listening. This is Brian Courtney with Short Bus Debate Club. Today we are going to talk about prisons. It kind of meshes with some of our latest episodes. We're going to talk about prisons as a whole. We're probably going to touch on privatized prisons and just the prison industrial complex and, what they're doing to make money off of incarcerating our citizens. As always, Darren Jolly is with me here today.
Hello, medium people.
So prisons, I used a stat in one of the latest episodes, and I said we have 25% of the prison population, even though we only have like 5% of the total global population. And that stat could be wrong. It could be right, but there's some of them out there say 20, some say 22, some say 25. So I'm going to give you some raw numbers so that you can decide what the percentages are. And I also want to make one thing perfectly clear is that when they use those numbers, they're saying incarcerated people. Okay, so if they pulled the numbers on a Friday and there were a bunch of people in the drunk tank at the city jail, plus all of the people at the state prison, they're going to use both those numbers. Now, those people in the drunk tank might get out the next day or on Monday, because city and county jails are short-term fixes. So generally the way it works is if you're in a city jail, you wait. If your crime was bad enough, then you go to county jail. And then from county jail, if your crime was bad enough, you're going to go to a state prison. Generally, the way it works is a county will only keep you for a year. If your sentence is to be longer than a year, then you need to go to prison and not jail. So I wanted to clear that up because that number, the 25% number, the 20% number, the number that I used to scare you guys the other day is including all of those people, from the one that's just in overnight to the one that's there for a week to the one that's on death row to the one that is, serving a 40-year sentence. So, wanted to clear that up real quick.
And it probably doesn't talk about the people that are on the fringes of it either. The people that, like halfway house concepts, like whether or not, because even if you're not in a prison proper, there are spaces where you're sort of like living on the edge of those.
Well, so that sort of depends because a lot of the numbers that you pull from the state will include parolees.
So while they're on parole, you're saying?
Right.
Okay.
Which would include halfway houses. But a lot of the states do things differently. Like last night I was looking up numbers, and I pulled numbers from the state of California. They've got a total of 96,719 people that are incarcerated. The state of Florida, which is the largest state agency in Florida, the Department of Corrections, and the third largest prison system, has 82,027 people incarcerated. Now, California, they say that they included the parole numbers. Florida didn't say. The state of New York made it incredibly difficult to pull the numbers.
What was the site that you used to pull it off of?
Their sites. So, okay. Department of Corrections for
the state.
Right, yeah. Right. And I've got a lot of other numbers that I pulled from the Bureau of Prisons, which is the federal agency that handles federal prisons. I just went brain dead. I have no idea what yeah, that's what I want. So, in 2019, Pew Research did a study, and they said that basically 639 people for every 100,000 in the United States were incarcerated. That put us number one in the world, and the top 5 rounded out with Cuba, Rwanda, one of the Istans, I think it was Turkmenistan. So yeah, we're number one, and it was Turkmenistan and El Salvador. So that rounded out the top 5, and I don't know if I really want to be in the company of Rwanda when it comes to incarceration and punishment. Another thing, we're about 6 minutes deep now, and I think that it's important because when we go back to our forefathers and when the United States was started, there was a big debate among the politicians then, probably as it is now, which is the difference between punitive and rehabilitative. People from other countries actually came over and looked at our prison system because they thought we were doing such a bang up job. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Either way, it seems like we have switched more to the storing of prisoners and the punitive type of thing as opposed to rehabilitating these people. Programs to help train them so that they could maybe get a job when they get out have been eliminated. Maybe not entirely, but they're slowly going away. GED programs and things like that. So I don't know if you want to talk about it, we'll talk about it, but
I don't think there's a way that you can deny the importance of that, because when you're sort of getting into that question of whether it's punitive or corrective or rehabilitative, whatever the term is that you're using. This is another theme that sort of keeps coming up is the idea. What is the purpose of what it is that you're trying to? When you put a person in prison, what are your intentions? Are you trying to get that person to see the error of their ways? You think that they're committing some sort of like antisocial act? Are they doing things in that sort of like, again, that sort of like Kantian, like if you imagine everybody does it, does society fall apart kind of thing? Is that your intention, or is your intention to make money out of it, to not deal with the problem? And maybe I shouldn't be so reductionist in relation to it. Maybe it's just that we don't know how to deal with rehabilitation, or it just takes a lot of energy and a lot of thought and a lot of creative social activity to be effective if you're going to try to help people, and it's a lot easier to just sort of lock them into that sort of revolving door of a system where you're just sort of assuming that once a person goes down that road, they're probably going to just keep going down that road.
Well, and it's tough too. I mean, I had a friend. Well, actually, you're the friend, but
what did I do?
You introduced me to a friend of yours, and we were talking about that guy down in Arizona. Remember Sheriff Crazy Joe? And he had that big outside prison, and he was basically treating everybody like shit and leaving them out in the hot sun and making them walk around in their underwear and, just all of this stuff. And that guy that you introduced me to thought that Crazy Joe was great, and he was doing all of these good things for Phoenix, Arizona. And
who the hell did I introduce you to that would have said something like that?
I can't remember his name. Yeah. Anyway, I tried to explain to him that, and this is another problem with the prison system, is that, a lot of these people, like Crazy Joe was locking up people that shoplifted for like a year. Well, if it's a kid who just stole something because, they were trying to get a thrill or they wanted a new shirt and couldn't afford it, whatever.
Or maybe they were hungry.
Well, and that was the example that I gave your friend, is that a lot of these people that are shoplifting, they're not doing it for fun. They're not doing it because they want to. They're doing it because they need to eat. And if that's the case, then punishing them isn't going to stop them when they get back out, because they still are going to need to eat. And that goes the same with the drug thing. A lot of these people are selling drugs because they need money to buy food, or they need money to pay rent or whatever. So, the Bureau of Prisons currently has 45.2% of the prison population, which works out to 66,589 people that are in there for drug offenses. If that person was dealing drugs because they needed to help support their family, not that they were a kingpin, because I think, they've got Chapo at the Supermax down in Florence. He was making billions of dollars.
We can pretty much assume that most of the people we're talking about aren't in Supermax.
Are not
at Supermax.
Right. And they are not kingpins.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So that's somebody that can't be rehabilitated or can't be punished, that can't be broken out of them, that punishment. More than likely, they are going to become recidivists. I mean, they're going to repeat.
They still have to survive.
Yeah.
They don't have the wherewithal to come out of prison. And obviously, once you have charges in your background, and you're required to declare those things. It makes it very difficult to get a job, particularly depending on the level of the charge. I mean, there's just no way that we're ever really addressing any of the questions that you're posing with regards to. I mean, you use the term recidivism. I mean, he's going to keep. I mean, there's a reason why they call it a revolving door, and it isn't just because. I mean, it's easy for a person to sit at home who's never had to negotiate that kind of a question to say they're lazy. I'm gonna let you know in a little secret. Committing criminal acts can be tiring, and you have to be pretty thoughtful. You have to develop strategies. It's work. People that do that stuff are not always necessarily whatever it is that you want to brand them as. But
no, and dealing drugs is fucking hard because not only do you have to come up with strategies, but most of the time you end up with some dildo calling you 24 hours a day because they want drugs. So there's not a lot of free time as a drug dealer.
I created a closed clientele system. It was only a few people, But of course, like it wasn't at the beginning, right? You have to go through your learning process and I did get arrested, once, and I ended up luckily not getting thrown in jail for any number of reasons in relation to it, because it was actually our buddy, a kid that we grew up with around the corner of us, that sold the quarter pound of weed to the cop. Because the contingency of me being involved was that I wasn't going to touch anything. He had to be the one. But either way, I had to go through those learning curves to figure out how to do it properly, and it is work, no matter what anybody wants to say. So.
Well, and even shoplifting is work, and I'm not trying to glorify drug dealers or people that steal, or burglars, which is also stealing, but I'm not trying to glorify those people or let them off the hook. I do believe we have these laws for a reason, and I would be pissed if somebody broke into my house and stole my TV or whatever, right? And I would want them to be punished. But there's a again, there's a difference between punishing someone and rehabilitating them. And I don't know which is right. And Ben Franklin didn't know which was right. You know,
What would old Ben say about this?
he had a hard time with it, and he thought that rehabilitation was more what we needed to do, if I'm thinking about it correctly. And I can't remember who was arguing, because back then they had like the new form of prison was where they didn't have everybody chained together and they didn't make everybody be quiet. You know, there was more freedom within said prison. And so that was one of the reasons that a lot of people were impressed. But then again, they were impressed with, you know, silence all the time too. So, you know, I don't want to move to a place where we're locking people down for 23 hours a day. I think that falls under cruel and unusual punishment.
I had a buddy that was in prison for about a year and a half, and it was one of those 23-hour lockdown things. Brutal.
Yeah, dude. I mean, I don't know. You just end up seeing a fucking guard through a slot on the door.
So when he was in there, his cellmate got a staph infection, and he ended up getting a staph infection. And then the only time that they were able to go out, like, it spread through the prison like horrible too. So because of the way that they were doing it, it created all these health issues. But I don't want to. The thing that you were saying about to be able to effectively, like you said, we're not glorifying crime. What we do instead is we try to imagine, empathize with the person, to think about how it was they got into a space to do what it was that they did. And as we've both suggested, some of this isn't empathy that's constructed in the abstract. Some of it's rooted in lived experience. But I do think that it would make more sense to try to rehabilitate people, but given the structure of the system that we have right now, the big business inside of
well, and take the business part out just for a second, because I do want to talk about that.
Okay.
But here's another issue that we talked about in a previous episode. So the number I gave you for drug offenses in the federal prison system was 45.2%. The next closest number was weapons charges or explosives, and they were at 21.4%. So yeah, I mean, that number doubled for the drug offenses. If we got rid of the drug offenders, then we could focus on people that actually needed to be rehabilitated. Sorry. Maybe that is true, maybe it's not, but it would be easier because the number would come down significantly.
Clearly, the possibility, at least for refocusing your goals, is there. But of course that takes will. At that point, and what is the point of a prison? Is the point of a prison to help solve these social problems, or is it a market? Is it a space where you have these gigantic companies? Like, and of course, when you're talking about the prison industrial complex, you're not just talking about private prisons. Private prisons is just one aspect of an extremely complicated. There's a lot of ways to make money off of spaces like this.
Okay, so Ben Franklin, and I knew he had something to do with Eastern State Penitentiary, but he was basically, prison was, what did he call it? A place of repentance. So they were in their cells most of the time, and then when they came out, they had hoods over their heads and weren't allowed to talk. So basically, he invented the Supermax.
But it was grounded in that like that religious sort of like feeling guilty.
Yes.
Blah, blah, blah.
Yes, there was some of that religion there, hence the repentance thing. Yes, and sorry, I know you were on a roll and I interrupted you.
That was not.
But yeah, I think if we got rid of the drug charges, then we could focus more on people that actually needed to be punished and or rehabilitated. But the money wouldn't be there for the private institutions.
So you'd have to rethink the logics that drive what it is that you're doing when it comes to prisons in the first place. Before we were starting up, you were talking about an executive order that was signed recently by.
Yeah, so Joe Biden wrote an executive order last year in January saying that they were not going to renew or start new contracts for prisons within the Bureau of Prisons and the Marshal Service. That did not include ICE, which means that really, so if you're an American citizen and you were in the Bureau of Prisons or being held captive by the Marshal Service, you don't have to worry about being in private prison for much longer. But if you are an immigrant from another country, generally the ones south of us, Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, if you are one of those guys, you're fucked. They're holding these people without any due process. And I'm guessing here, but I'm thinking that they're not going to fucking, send them back to their own countries because the United States is paying them X amount of dollars per day, per body. So now, I'm sorry. I know a lot of people hate Mexicans for crossing the border, and they generally call them Mexicans, but they're not all Mexicans.
To be sure.
Maybe it's one of those tomato things, and Hispanic is good enough. I don't know, because that was another weird thing with the numbers. The Bureau of Prisons, if you looked up numbers by race, the Asians, blacks, Native Americans, and whites were listed. If you looked the numbers up by ethnicity, then it was Hispanic and not non-Hispanic. So that means that they broke up, some of those Asians, blacks, Native Americans, and whites were partially Hispanic. I'm guessing some Cubans and Puerto Ricans were involved. I don't know. Is there a Native American Mexican?
You're asking me to answer a question that I don't even think that our census positions have a good way of even negotiating. So.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so the numbers were weird, but what I was getting at is a lot of people in this country hate Mexicans and they think they should be detained and deported and whatever.
Meaning that they support these types of activities inside these prisons.
Possibly. Or maybe they just don't know what the fuck is going on. Maybe they just want them to be deported. Because, how would you feel if let's say, things sucked here and we wanted to go to Canada and the Canadians started fucking pulling all Americans into some weird center, where they run you through these chain link fences like cattle, and they issue you a number, and then you go and lay on a bed that's stacked 3 high, and you eat your meals in there with another 400 people or whatever the number is.
They're letting you know what it's about.
Right. But then they figure, well, we're going to go ahead and keep these Americans because they're paying us 27 Canadian dollars per body per day. And if we just stack them, we're only 3 beds high now. We could probably go to 5. That guy towards the ceiling probably won't be able to sleep on his side, but...
And only 16 of them are dying every day.
Right.
We're taking in 150. So, that's just like 89%, that's we can handle that.
Those numbers are easy, and especially if we split them up and take the kids away from the parents, we can send the kids somewhere else, and then we can stack those motherfuckers like 9, 10 deep, right? So fuck it.
Your comment about not knowing what's really going on, not understanding the prospect. I mean, there's the stigmatism. You know, people have the idea that they, this perception that they dislike a population. One thing, like, under the Trump presidency, there was this gigantic rhetorical
brown hate.
Yeah, I mean, it was about what was, you know, the marches coming up from Central America, and they're coming to, you know, but those complexes that were existing on the border, the number, I mean, like, I think statistically, at least the information that was made public was that the numbers were higher under Obama, but there were these reactionary, you know, Democrats saying, you know, Trump, you evil motherfucker, you know, but right. I mean, like, Obama's doing all Trump is doing is continuing a policy that Obama had been implementing, you know. And to be perfectly honest with you, I remember at the beginning of this term, you know, they sent Kamala Harris down there, and of course Kamala, she only opens her mouth to change feet, right? She's not very good at that. She will not be the next president of the United States. I feel like I bet $9 on that one, but. Again, it was just a continuation of the same policy, you know. I mean, we don't know, and really, because it doesn't affect the royal we don't in terms of the U.S. population doesn't know, and we don't care because right. It's all functioning in the abstract. It doesn't, you know, what like you said, these not all Mexicans. A lot of those populations that were coming from Central America. That was, you know, had to do with the drug trade and like the way that these farmers were being coerced to do certain things which made their lives, if you weren't doing them, you were going to get a cat popped in your ass. You know, it was a dangerous, scary thing. So you leave to give yourself an opportunity. So really, you're only coming up here. It's like a refugee kind of thing, you know, where you're asking to establish refugee status, but we don't know. We don't understand the complexities of what these things are that are happening. I do think it would be really funny if the Canadians did that to Americans, though, just for the sake of historical irony.
Well, no, but I mean, obviously we're not running up to Canada, but I mean, so I think the movie Barbed Wire had a similar premise where...
Who was the star of Barbed Wire?
Pam Anderson.
Pam Anderson. Well, I'm sure that was like... she probably got at least considered for...
Oh yeah, dude! She won all kinds of awards. It was great. It was an awesome movie. Best actress.
I didn't mean to step on her dick with Barbed Wire.
But people were running to Canada in that movie.
Really?
Yeah, it's not going to happen. But if it did, I mean...
Why were they running to Canada?
Oh, everything... They didn't really get into it a whole lot, but from what I gather, I mean, it was a serious dystopian type movie. So there was something bad happening in the United States. There was this great war that happened. And Canadian soil was really the only place that was safe and free. So that's why.
Okay.
Anyway.
Interesting. I'm forced to admit for about 2 seconds, and then regress back into my sarcastic disposition in relation to Pam Anderson's acting career. Yes.
It was a good movie, dude. You know, you shouldn't.
Well, I'm still gonna make fun of it, dude. I mean, come on. What are you supposed to do? You know?
What do you always tell me about suspending disbelief? Yeah.
No, dude, come on. I even asked, you know, I mean, when you said what you said, I was kind of hoping for some sort of significant, like, thoughtful narrative in that moment, you know, so.
That was the only thing I could think of where people were leaving the United States to go to Canada.
I got it.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that the Canadians could do it to us just as easily. And if we were fucking going up there in droves, I don't see why they wouldn't. I mean, they could just deport us. But if they had an institution where they could make money off of it, Why wouldn't they?
Well, I don't, Jordan Peterson. So you familiar with him at all? He's kind of a douchebag, but he's an academic from up in the Great White North, and he says all these like really heavy duty inflammatory things about trans populations all the time. He's doing it just to get
ratings.
Yeah, he's trying to produce reactions out of people. Something I wish people would consider more. Not feeding into the stupidity of a person's idiocy. But I could definitely see that douchebag being at the forefront of these Americans. They're going to come up here and they're going to get all of your kids to transition. And
right.
So we gotta get them all into prisons and stack them 16 high. Get the kids over here because we can stack them 27 high. Jordan Peterson would be a perfect candidate for that type of reactionary policy for sure. I'm certain there's a lot of people out there that would get that. So.
Yeah, I mean it's really kind of funny though if you think about it, and this doesn't make what ICE is doing right. But so if you're from Mexico, if you're Mexican and you're trying to come here and we treat you badly, you say, why would you do that? Why do you treat us like this? We're just people trying to make a better life. But it's funny because Mexico has a similar problem with people crossing over illegally from Guatemala and the Honduras, whatever. And they treat those people like shit. They kick their ass, they put them in prison, they do all kinds of stuff. So it's funny because really, I guess any country that has a border is going to treat whomever is coming over like
isn't
shit.
That kind of how that train happened in the first place? Like the metaphorical train was that they were kind of trying to push them through, like when the Trump stuff was going on. Like they didn't want them. So they were trying to. I swore I remember.
Oh, they might have. Yeah. I mean, it might have been something similar to what California did with gangbangers in the fucking 80s, where their prisons were overflowing and they didn't want to deal with them, so they let most of them out, gave them bus fare, and sent them to places like Denver and Salt Lake City, Portland, Oregon. So maybe the Mexicans did that to, Hondurans and Guatemalans and Costa Ricans and whatever.
El Paso. It's right on the border. Brownsville, right? The thing about the populations that you're talking about, though, I was going over some stuff last night, and this guy, when I was in school still, that I used to read a ton, his name is William I. Robinson. He wrote this book called The Global Police State. But one of the things that he talked about, where he was linking some of the policies that we're talking about in relation to prison industrial complexes, is these ideas called green zones and gray zones. And the idea is that there's this sort of like concept of like a global social apartheid. And in that space where there's this division between the safe locations and the green zones, right? Which, I mean, of course, that originates from, at least in present time, it originates from what was going on in Iraq too, when they had that fortified position in the center of Baghdad, where essentially all the contractors and the people that were tied to the U.S. military activity and NATO and forces and the other forces that had come to work with the United States, it was a safe space. And it's not just about safety per se; it's about creating commerce in those spaces where you can continue to have daily life and.
You've got a swimming pool, and you bring in Kentucky Fried Chicken and Burger King and Pizza Hut.
It's normal, but then outside of that cupola of that green zone space, you have total fucking chaos, right? And in that area of total chaos, one of the terms that Robinson uses is surplus humanity. And the idea is that he sort of starts the discussion when he talks about like the rise of automation, but really the demand for people to work to extract value so that a person can make money out of their labor is not as great now as it was, say, in the 1800s. So you have this tension in the system where you have the people that work, you have the people that don't work. There's this whole reserve army of labor where you can keep the cost of wages down But the point is that it's sort of this dominant space, and in that dominant space, the more that people cannot find a way to reproduce the necessary conditions for them to survive on a daily basis, for their children to survive on a daily basis, um, creates certain demands, and those demands, people do some things in response to them. So the idea that Robinson puts forward is, with the rise of this surplus humanity, you create this space where there's an increasing demand for things like prisons, because you're not going to be able to, like if people, they're like, oh, this whole democracy thing's a sham, this whole concept of opportunity is probably not gonna help me, then people start to do other things. So, and this is a rising tide, a rising wave. So in that space, it's all it's all these people who are essentially invisible. They're on the outside, and they're going to, I just don't see, because of things like that, I don't see prisons.
So I don't think we have any green zones here in the United States per se. I mean, you could say that, definitely there are these large gated communities, that could be green zone-ish. And they have them everywhere. Down in Florida, they're on the water. Here, they're in the mountains. In California, they're in the mountains and on the water. Where these people that spent $25 million on a house are sitting behind this gated community with armed guards and whatever. That's probably the closest thing we've got to a green zone.
He talks about tent cities, though. Like, I mean, there are some spaces in California where, with homeless populations where they're sort of, I mean, we haven't arrived at the level, where you're dealing with slums like you are in India that are so rough and so nasty.
Or in Buenos Aires.
Yeah, dude, Brazil, I mean, nasty, brutal in certain spaces. But the seeds are, I mean, I think you're right that it's not cultivated. And of course, on some level, a person could argue that green zoning is a matter of degree. But the whole concept of those gated communities in the first place,
well, they definitely have kept everyone separate for a reason. And that we're not too fucking far from the tent cities thing. I mean, up there by Red Rocks, all of those parking lots around there, people are living in their cars. Shitloads of people are living in their cars around there.
I didn't know that. Not Red Rocks, just
in the parking lots all around there, like the generally on the hogback.
The rest area kind of spaces.
Right. So I mean, we're not too far from the tent cities, and that was kind of, we went way off topic, but that's kind of what I saw with, my book idea was all of these poor people figuring out a way to make a living off of taking care of the rich in one way or another. Maybe assassinating them, maybe funneling some of their money somewhere else, doing things like that so that they could do things. And it wasn't like money was being passed directly for these jobs, but more along the lines of, well, if a job was done, there may be money involved, but now you had enough food stored for 6 months, or everybody got some kind of place to live, some sort of shelter to keep them out of the storm. Or anyway, it's rambling in my head. Right. So yeah, I guess that's probably a pretty good place to start wrapping it up. I mean, really, it is still the rich versus the poor. green zone or not, if you are the son of a billionaire or a multimillionaire, you're not going to go to jail for a DUI. If you are the son or daughter of Bob the plumber, you're going to jail for a DUI.
If you're the son of a millionaire and your father's running for president, they're not even going to write any stories about your laptop right before the election because we believe in democracy.
So it really is the rich versus the poor. We're in a battle of socioeconomic status, and it's, I know everyone says it's a color thing, and the mass media lets that message come through because to some degree it is, but the fact is we're poor, and that's why. And if we band together, I think we would be so much better off instead of pointing fingers and, you know, using slang and thinking all white people are out to hurt you, or all black people are out to hurt you, or all Mexicans. Think about the fact that we're all in it together. I mean, I've been beaten by the police more than any black person I know, and I've been in jail more than any black person I know. So, what is that? I mean,
but even if you take it out of an anecdotal space, like it's important to understand, like there's a clear strategy. And yeah, we're tangenting a little bit here. I don't think we tangented too bad though. I mean, I think that the concept of green zoning and militarizing communities leading to the demand for prisons is, I mean, it's a systemic kind of thing at that point. But having said that, there's a reason why the Democratic Party is utilizing the box checking strategy right now. I mean, if it justifies, there's this rhetorical spaces, opportunity, blah 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 blah. You check all the boxes. See, we got a gay black person over here. We got Latino who transitioned. I mean, these are all.
Dude, no, I just thought it was kind of funny because I was looking up all of these prison stats, right? And I'm pulling reports. California was the only one that I pulled where they were bragging about changing their reports. So now on the reports for total population, it says male, female, non-binary.
Yeah.
They're the only ones that do it, or the only ones I found that do it. I'm sure that Mississippi's right on top of that too.
And
Tennessee.
The point is not for us. Look, we love y'all, no matter who you are or what you are.
I don't love you, more than likely. I probably can't stand
I'll
you.
I'll speak for myself. I can't stand you either, but I do love you all. But the point that Ryan's making is that if you're going to come up against these power structures, if you speak their language, they're going to incorporate you into that power structure. They don't care what you look like. As a matter of fact, they do care what you look like, because if you check enough boxes and it makes it look like they're incorporating people that are that are sort of identified as past oppressed people, then it makes it look like we have this concept called progress, which is, in my estimation, the way that is being played out, nothing but a bunch of bullshit. So if you're gonna fight, what I identify as transnational capital, you have to understand that the only way that you can do that is by finding people that are like-minded with you and banding together with them and struggling. So
that's fair enough. So just to wrap things up, drug policy is bad. There's a shitload of people in prison for drugs. I didn't cover any of the numbers as far as race or ethnicity, but they're high. I was surprised that there were more whites than anybody else in prison, based on all of the arguments that I hear on the media. So anyway, prisons are bad. Private prisons are worse. We shouldn't be making money off of people's incarceration, because that just makes you want to keep them incarcerated even longer because we can make more money. And fuck it, let's band together and try to fight these cocksuckers together.
Fuck it.
Prisons are bad, okay?
I am Brian Courtney with the Short Bus Debate Club. Thanks for listening today, and
I'm Darren Jolly.
we will talk to you soon.